Chapter 2 The House on Hummingbird Lane. The Martin family lived in a tall wooden house, painted blue. It was 2 stories high, and it seemed to be built upside down, because all of the bedrooms were on the first floor, while the kitchen, living room, and dining room were all up on the second. To make it easier to go up and down with the groceries, Mrs. Martin had built in a tiny elevator. It was a strange sort of elevator. Most elevators are like tiny rooms that move up and down. The Martin family's elevator was not a tiny room that went up and down. It was a long winding tube, like a slide. Whenever anyone wanted to go up to the second floor, they climbed into the tube and pushed the button. The tube would suck them up just like a giant vacuum cleaner, and they would go sliding up the tube until they reached the top. Whenever someone wanted to go back down, they could slide to the bottom just like a regular slide. The house had 5 bedrooms on the ground floor. Melanie, Mary, and Mathew Maria all had their own bedroom. Maura and Mia shared a room together because they were twins and they liked to do everything together. They had a bunk bed in their room, and every night they switched who would sleep on the top and who would sleep on the bottom. Melanie and Mary each had canopy beds. All 4 of those girls had pink walls and white carpet and a lot of dolls and stuffed animals. Mathew Maria's room was not pink, and she did not have a lot of dolls or stuffed animals. Her room was painted blue and was filled with books. Her bed wasn't a normal bed either, for it looked like a rocket ship. It hung from the ceiling like a swing. Sometimes Mathew Maria would swing in it while she read, as though it were a hammock. The final room was for Mr. and Mrs. Martin. They had a water bed. It was the sort of bed that was a lot of fun to jump on, though no one was allowed to do that. Their walls were painted white, but they were covered in pin markings. Sometimes Mrs. Martin would get an idea for an invention, but she couldn't find any paper, so she would write it on the wall, or on the sheets to the bed, or on the curtains. The room was filled with wires and half-finished machines. It also had books on gardening, and it often had soil and leaves that came in with Mr. Martin after he had been working in his garden. The garden was in the backyard, and it was a very impressive garden, because Mr. Martin was a very good gardener. And even Mr. Martin didn't always know what was growing there. He had a jar filled with seeds, any seeds he might come across, and every once in a while he would draw out seeds at random to plant, and then he would see what would grow. He grew a cactus that way, and an orange tree, and a bush of wondrous flowers that grew all the way up the windows of the second floor. You could look at them from the kitchen. The second floor had everything that the first floor didn't. There was a very large living room, a kitchen, and a dining room. There was also a workshop room, where Mrs. Martin would work on her inventions when she wasn't working in her bedroom. The door to the workshop room was always closed, and no one was allowed in there but Mrs. Martin, for some of her contraptions could be very dangerous. Every once in a while, however, she would open the door to let everyone peek inside and see what she had invented. Once it had been the elevator. Another time it was a bubble machine. The machine made fantastic bubbles. They didn't go pop when you touched them, and were colored in every color of the rainbow. The Martin family played with them all day, bouncing them around the house. They were just like bouncing balls, except they were so light they couldn't break anything or knock over lamps. Then Mathew Maria got the idea to glue a couple of bubbles to the bottom of her shoes. She went bouncing about, up and down the stairs and against the walls. She jumped so high that she touched the ceiling. Finally, she bounced straight out of the window and landed in a tree. After that, Mrs. Martin said that bubbles on shoes were too dangerous, and made her take them off.